Hi, my name is Josh Bergrunn, and I am a real estate and real estate finance lawyer at Calfee, Halter Griswold. I am also a proud member of the LGBT community, and I'm in charge of our LGBT affinity group. I'm going to be sitting down with Abbey Brown. She is a litigation, employment, and labor attorney with Calfee, and we are going to be discussing issues that impact the LGBT community, specifically related to labor and employment.
Thanks, Josh. I'm happy to talk to you today. I regularly counsel employers and work with HR teams on compliance issues with employment laws. So happy to be here.
What are some of the major federal laws that people should know about that offer LGBTQ plus protections for employees at their places of employment?
The major federal law that offers protections for LGBT individuals is Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which, by the text of the law, protects individuals from discrimination only on the basis of sex. For a long time, federal courts were really split over whether on the basis of sex included sexual orientation and gender identity, with some courts holding that it did and some holding that it did not. And ultimately, in June of 2020, the Supreme Court heard argument on 3 related cases and held that Title VII does protect employees against discrimination because they are gay or transgender. And that's known as the Bostock decision.
Oh, that's very interesting. And I think a great follow-up question would be, are there any state laws in Ohio that also provide protections at work?
So Ohio's civil rights law is codified in Chapter 4112 of the Ohio Revised Code. And it's very similar to Title VII, the federal law, in that it bans discrimination on the basis of sex, but it doesn't explicitly talk about sexual orientation or gender identity, just like the federal law doesn't. And the Supreme Court of Ohio hasn't actually interpreted the meaning of sex in that law to include sexual orientation and gender identity like the U.S. Supreme Court has. That said, the Supreme Court of Ohio has ruled that the federal case law interpreting Title VII generally does apply to cases involving alleged discrimination under 4112. So that means historically, whenever there's a case brought in an Ohio court that alleges, both state and federal discrimination violations, the court says, we're just going to lump this all together. We're going to do one analysis, and they follow the federal law. So what that means to me, practically speaking, is I expect Ohio law to continue to do that, to follow the federal law. And while the Bostock decision is pretty new, so far that does appear to be the case in Ohio. So while Ohio law doesn't explicitly provide protections to LGBT individuals anywhere in the text, I do believe those protections are still there under the existing ban on sex discrimination, just like they are under federal law.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much for explaining to the group the difference between the state laws and the federal laws impacting LGBTQ individuals.
Thanks.
What really is discrimination when we are talking about the workplace?
So discrimination generally means, treating an individual badly because of what's called a protected characteristic under the law. And protected characteristics vary by state or even by city, but generally include categories like sex, which now includes sexual orientation and gender identity, race, age, disability, and others as well. And there's various kinds of discrimination claims that someone might make against an employer. So if someone experiences an adverse action in the workplace, that means like being fired or demoted, or if an employer refuses to hire an individual because of that protected characteristics, for example, because of their sex, because they're pregnant, because of their sexual orientation or their gender identity, that is one kind of discrimination claim. But discrimination might also take the form of harassment.
So can you explain what you mean by sexual harassment?
Yeah, there are 2 types of sexual harassment claims. One is called quid pro quo, and the other is called a hostile work environment claim. And quid pro quo means this for that, and the stereotype for that type of claim would be a supervisor telling a subordinate that in order to get a raise or promotion or to avoid getting fired, the subordinate has to engage in a sexual act with the supervisor. The other type, a hostile work environment claim, that can be created by anyone in the workplace. It might be between two coworkers, not necessarily a supervisor and a subordinate. It involves harassing conduct that is sufficiently severe or pervasive, and that's a legal term there. A lot of legal battles are fought in the courtroom over what counts as severe or pervasive. So for example, a single negative comment referring to someone's gender identity or sexual orientation likely would not be severe or pervasive enough to constitute a discrimination claim under the law. But if it's occurring all the time, or if there's one event that's sufficiently serious, that would constitute a hostile work environment claim. And both the state and federal laws also prohibit retaliation against individuals who make complaints of sexual harassment in the workplace.
You teed that up perfectly. So what is retaliation, and what does it look like from a legal perspective?
So the law is very clear that employees should have certain rights. And they should be protected when they take certain actions.
Okay.
So, for example, employees have the right to make complaints about workplace discrimination. And employers cannot mistreat employees for doing so. And so the legal meaning of retaliation is when an employer treats someone badly because they've engaged in what's called a protected activity. And in this context, a protected activity could be a variety of things. But so, for example, what we just talked about, which is making a complaint to your employer about discrimination in the workplace. That's a protected activity. It could also be filing a charge with the EEOC or the OCRC. Those are the Ohio and federal agencies that investigate workplace discrimination. Or it could even just be participating as a witness in an investigation, an internal investigation, or in someone else's discrimination complaint or someone else's lawsuit. So you might file a retaliation claim if, say, for example, you complained about discrimination in the workplace and then you started being mistreated by your employer.
So what are some things the LGBT plus community should know or do before they would file a discrimination-related claim in the workplace?
So first things first, get a copy of your employee handbook and read it. There's probably a section in that handbook about how to make a complaint of discrimination to your employer. So do that. Follow the complaint procedure set forth in the handbook. That protects you, but it also puts the employer on notice. And hopefully the employer now is starting down the path of actually fixing the problem that you're complaining about. If you don't get a response that you're hoping for, you may have to go farther up the chain of command, so to speak. So do that. Most good anti-discrimination policies will have multiple people listed as designated individuals to receive that kind of a complaint. So if your immediate supervisor isn't responsive, keep trying until you've got the right people on notice who will hopefully take the necessary steps to fix the problem. So let's say you've exhausted the internal complaint procedure at your work and nothing has been done about the issue. Or let's say that the individual designated to receive reports is actually the problem.
Yeah.
They might be the harasser. Perhaps you've made the complaint and now you're being retaliated against for it. So then it might be time to escalate the issue and actually file a charge with the EEOC or the OCRC. And that's a prerequisite in Ohio for bringing a sexual orientation, or gender identity discrimination lawsuit.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Abbey, for helping us, address very important questions that are facing the LGBTQ community, not only in Ohio, but elsewhere. Appreciate your time.
Thanks. Happy to do it.